You know, one of the things that it's very hard to believe when you're 22 or 23 years old is that you don't already know everything. It turns out, I mean, as I suspect, people learn more and more as they get older, that you seem to realize that you know less and less every year that goes by. I can only imagine that by the time I'm 70, I will realize I know nothing.
Start at the beginning with the idea for Amazon.com. How did you get this idea? When, how, why?
The hedge fund I worked at was a quantitative hedge fund. We used Unix everywhere. Mosaic was the first graphical browser on the World Wide Web. And in 1994, in the Unix community, a lot of people were talking about Mosaic and the World Wide Web, and it was growing explosively. David Shaw, my boss, assigned me to look at different things that D.E. Shaw & Co., the company, might do in and around the internet. And the more I poked around in it, I found this one fact, which I found just astonishing. On a website, I found that web usage was growing at 2,300% a year. This is a time when nobody could know what the baseline usage was, but it was quite easy to figure out the growth rate. And anything that doesn't have a completely trivial baseline that's growing that fast is invisible today and ubiquitous tomorrow. And that really was sort of the wake-up call for me. And I went and got a book on mail order and looked at all the different categories that do well by mail order and started force ranking those and shifting them around. Books is near the bottom of that list. But it became clear that the reason that books wasn't a great mail order product is because you can't put a decent selection in a catalog, in a paper catalog.
Step by step, ferociously, Jeff Bezos.
So I love that legend. I don't know if it's legend or not, but you were in the car with your wife driving across the United States, and you were doing the business plan as you were going there. Did you almost feel the pull of go west, young man?
Absolutely. In fact, I had not made the final decision. By the time the movers came and collected our stuff to take it from New York City to Seattle, I was still deciding between Seattle and Portland. Oh. And so I just told them, well, just get started heading west. And I'll let you know in a few days whether you should go to Seattle or Portland.
So what was the deciding factor?
Well, the deciding factor was that Seattle is a little bit bigger. And so, I looked at the number of flights per week in the Seattle airport, and at that time, I think it was 3,000 flights a week coming out of Seattle and 1,000 flights a week coming out of Portland. And so there are just a lot of little things that in a bigger city are a tiny bit easier.
From that point, about 15 months later, we launched Amazon.com in July of '95. And at that time, we launched with 1 million titles, which is 5 or 6 times as many titles as you'd find in even the largest superstore. And if you were to print that in a paper catalog, it would have been the size of 13 New York City phone books. So that was the sort of the insight that led to Amazon.com.
Yeah. Now, is that story true?
The first draft of the business plan was indeed written on the way. The idea was already well formulated. Yeah. A lot of research had been done, but the first draft, it's not true, however, legends grow. It's not true, however, that I called investors on the way. I did call a lawyer at the time. We're making a very precise prediction, and there's a lot of work to make that. It's not a slam dunk.
Yeah, well, let's talk about
we
that.
feel very good about it, and
what has to
focused on it.
change for you to start making money? More customers, higher prices, lower costs, fewer products, more products, better service. What?
Most of the change that we're driving is in various kinds of operating efficiencies. So if you look at what we did over the last 5 years, we followed a strategy of get big fast. And that was a really important thing to do. And the team that we have at the company really focused on it very strongly. And it worked. If you look at us versus most of the other competitors in our space, and by the way, the way we did that was by doing a great job for customers. It wasn't that we were genius marketers or anything else. Our best marketing dollars have always been spent on making the website better and easier to use and making distribution centers and customer service better. Those are our best marketing dollars.
Our timing was good. Our choice of product categories, books, was a very good choice, and we did a lot of analysis on that to pick that category as the first best category for e-commerce online, but there were no guarantees that that was a good category. At the time we launched this business, it wasn't even crystal clear that the technology would improve fast enough that ordinary people, non-computer people, would even want to bother with this technology. So that was good luck.
So we've done a great job of that. And then what we have to do is turn a good portion of that focus, which was devoted to growth, to operating efficiency. It was only 3.5 years ago, it's very hard to remember, that when we, at the time of our IPO, we had annualized sales of about $60 million a year. Now, when you have sales of $60 million a year, if you can get a 1% operating efficiency by doing a bunch of hard work, that will net you, over the course of the year, 1% of 60 million, which is about $600,000. That's not very much money. And really what you should be doing is, instead of investing all of that executive bandwidth, time, energy, hardworking people on trying to get that 1% operating efficiency, you should instead be trying to build a company of the scale where 1% matters. By the way, it's incredibly fun, intellectually challenging work. It's every bit as much fun as being focused on making sure that we achieve the scale necessary to be a lasting company.
Yeah. Well, there's a trade-off here. I mean, you could say we would grow to $5 billion without worrying about profitability. You could say we should have gone for profitability as a somewhat smaller company. In retrospect, do you think it would have been better to grow a little more slowly and get to profitability sooner?
I actually suspect that we probably timed things about right. The reason that scale is so important in this business is because the fixed costs are so high and the variable costs are relatively low compared to a physical store. So, physical stores, a single physical store can be profitable. That's what they have a term for it. They call it four-wall profitability. And if you build 500 such stores, roughly speaking, 500 such stores will be about 500 times as profitable as one store. Not quite, because there are some efficiencies, but basically, if you're going to double your sales, you have to double your number of selling square feet, you have to double your number of sales associates. So as you double sales, you also double costs. That's not how our business works. We have very high fixed costs in software development, content development. In fact, in some ways, our business is a lot more like yours, where the cost of putting Business Week together is going to be largely independent of your circulation.
True. We don't have $2.7 billion in revenue.
But you probably don't have our losses either.
However, we're profitable.
But I'll tell you, we had a...
So you want to trade places? Is that what we're saying here?
We're okay where we are. But
So are we.
That's right. I think we're both well suited for our roles. $700 million at that point. So we basically, began the year 2000 with about $1.4 billion in cash. We ended the year 2000 with about $1.1 billion in cash. So we used about $300 million in that year. In the year 2001, we have told people that we expect to use about $200 million in cash and end the year with about $900 million in cash. So we're very comfortable with our cash position, despite some of the things that you read. In fact, we had great good news today because Moody's, the credit rating agency, it was a surprise to me, came out and said that they were moving us from a stable to a positive, and said that by their analysis we have at least 18 to 24 months of cash. So, yeah, thank you. Which is what we've been saying for a while, but people listen to Moody's more than they listen to us.
What have you learned from the general .com crash, not just the Amazon experience?
So I think the most important thing is to very clearly separate, and it's so hard for people to do, but to very clearly separate the customer utility from the stock market. In other words, the companies that are getting built really are creating significant intrinsic value. What long-term investors want to do, they want you to figure out how to please your customers. The way you please long-term investors is with long-term results. And the way you get long-term results is by offering something of genuine value that improves people's lives, saves them time, saves them money. That's the way you do that. And by the way, you can have, this is a Warren Buffettism, but he says you can hold a rock concert or you can hold a ballet, but don't hold a rock concert and advertise it as a ballet. So, the goal here is to be as clear as we possibly can about the fact that this is a company which is inappropriate for short-term investors and hopefully very appropriate for long-term investors.
Who do you think has got?
Well, I think one of the very interesting companies is Google. I think they're doing
The search engine.
Yeah, the search engine. I think they're doing a fine job. So that's, I think that's...
What's their business model? How do they make
Well,
money?
that's a good question. You'd have to ask them. I don't know. I think they have an advertising-based model, which I know is really in vogue right now. And but they're very smart guys. I've met them, and I predict, the beginning of the right beginning is to have something that customers value, and they certainly built that. That alone is not enough.
Right.
You also do need a business model. Ours was always simple because it was the traditional retail business model. You buy products at one price and sell them at another price.
Well, you've had a pretty good run.
Yeah, hey.
Let me ask you about your investments. Now, Amazon has made numerous investments in a lot of other companies. I made a list: Pets.com,
Yeah.
Webvan, Ashford, NextCard, Audible, Living.com.
Yeah, thanks a lot for making that list. Did you mention Living?
No, but I'll put it on my list.
Might as well add Living.com.
Okay. Yeah, I did mention Living.
Oh, good.
So what does this do for the customer? The customer in your sense, not in the investor sense.
Well, so we made a number of these investments. The two most famous ones are probably Living and Pets.com, neither of which is around anymore.
Yes.
And we invested a significant amount of money and lost a significant amount of money. At the time we made those investments, we were very, I in particular, and a lot of people in the company were, I think, for the most part, rightly convinced of what had for a long time been a very useful metaphor for making decisions about the internet, which was the land rush metaphor. And we knew that some of these categories, pet supplies in the case of Pets.com, furniture in the case of Living.com, that they were not going to be on our priority list anytime soon. So rather than try to do these categories ourselves when we thought we had better prospects to do ourselves, we thought we'll kind of cover that ship by investing in these companies. Since this is a land rush mode, we don't want to miss out on this, and perhaps later we can integrate it into the company or do something else. So that was the rationale. Well, it just didn't work out that way. It's very difficult to be a small e-commerce company. Actually, you can be very small. It's very difficult to be a medium-sized e-commerce company. There's a very tough sort of regime in the middle there. And so with a long enough financing runway, perhaps these companies could have achieved, acquired enough customers to achieve the scale that they needed to build sustaining, lasting companies. But when the financing runway or rug was pulled out from under them, they had to close their doors. There was no other alternative. I mean, the only alternative for us would have been to, put more money into these companies to try and keep them afloat. That would have been an even bigger mistake.
So they ran up their costs too high, too fast before they ran up their revenue.
Correct. Which, in a land rush model of thinking about the world is probably the right strategy. The land rush metaphor, in my opinion, was a very useful one for many years. But sometime in the last couple of years sort of faded away out of usefulness. And you have to remember, the more obscure the item in some sense, the better, because the higher the margins can be on that hard-to-find item. So, they sold a lot of ferret hammocks. I didn't even know that ferrets sleep in hammocks. But the problem is, it's not a very big business, and so That's, that's why probably that makes more sense as a category in a multi-category store like Amazon.com than it does as a standalone business.
Yeah.
So the other thing that we learned, and we sort of knew this, but we just didn't know the degree to which this would be true, is that it was going to be very difficult to be what we call a monoline, a single category. And the reason is the same, that the fixed costs are so high. The e-commerce systems that we develop are very appropriate for, for not just books, but also for, DVD players. We can use those same systems.
Sure.
So it's, it's not at all impossible to build these systems and to, do so at a reasonable cost. But in a land rush mode, people weren't even doing that at a reasonable cost. They were doing it at an unreasonable cost.
What about the grocery delivery business?
Now that's a tough business. So we invested in a company called Home Grocer, which was subsequently acquired by Webvan. And I don't know, we now own, I don't know the exact figure, but it's roughly 8% of Webvan, something like that. And, that's a very tough, very capital-intensive business.
Mm-hmm. So,
customers like the service. By the way, one thing to do that B2B reminds me of, if anybody is an entrepreneur out there, it was a very clear lesson. Don't chase the buzzwords. It's so humorous to watch companies try to catch a wave. And really what you want to do is figure out what it is you do. And if you're a company that primarily serves consumers, and that's where your competencies lie, and that's what you've been focused on, don't change your business plan because that temporarily went out of vogue.
To the market.
Well, we don't need to raise money, and one of the things that we have said is that while we say we don't need to raise money and we don't, we are reserving the flexibility to do so for strategic reasons or to strengthen the balance sheet, which is basically what this individual is suggesting. So we're not ruling that out. But we're also quite happy with our cash position, and maybe if the Moody's change helps things and so on, maybe the climate will change a little bit, and then and maybe that won't be necessary.
Pressure will come off. Yeah. Based on what you think Amazon.com has to do to turn an operating profit, do you think you're the best CEO to do that job, that operating efficiency job?
I think I am,
your background,
with a lot of help.
Yeah.
I should just answer.
Sure.
The reason, by the way, I think I'm a good person to be the CEO is because I know so much about the company and its history. And we have a very precise definition for what it means to be customer-centric. And it is three things: listen, invent, and personalize. And listening is probably the most traditional meaning of customer-centric. But I think that the second piece is most important, and it often involves not listening to your customers. And that is the invention. Because you have to remember that it's not the customer's job to invent for themselves. Every one of our customers has their own job, and they're inventing for their customers. And if you do focus groups and things, you will oftentimes be led astray when it comes to invention, because customers don't necessarily know in specific ways what it is that they would want. In fact, if you describe it to them, they may say, by the way, I describe to many people, yeah, we're going to have a 1 million title book catalog, and you'll be able to order with your computer, and the books will come by UPS. And anybody, especially who was in the book business, thought this was a terrible idea. So listening only gets you so far. Our mission is bigger than us. What we want to do with respect to customer centricity is set a new standard worldwide for customer centricity. And I actually use Sony as the example, very impressed by their early mission. Their mission was to make Japan known for quality. This is coming out of World War II, if you look at this, it wasn't to make Sony known for quality. It was to make Japan known for quality. And they actually did it. And if you have a mission that's bigger than your company, then, it's more fun.
You treat all customers the same. I mean, a lot of companies say, we're going to lavish a lot of marketing attention, a lot of service on the customers that give us 80% of the business.
Or like Business Week, you charge your best customers more.
It works, Jeff.
I know.
No, but do you want to change chairs? Do you deal with your best
You know
customers
this is
in a
true,
more...
right? All you have to do is let your subscription run out, and then they'll send you 80% off if you resubscribe. If you just slavishly resubscribe, you pay full price. Don't be fooled.
It still only costs, $49 a year. A lot of companies focus a lot of attention on their best customers and less attention on their less good customers. Do you?
Yeah, well, we would like to actually do more of that. At this point in time, pretty much we treat all of our customers the same. And we try to treat them all really well. But you're absolutely right. If you look at some of the segments, some of our segments of customers are, relatively small percentage of customers, very large percentage of sales. And we would like to figure out over time ways to treat those customers better, because they're better customers.
Mm-hmm. In that sense.
Well, actually, I think if you, having just done about 15 interviews
Yes.
with the CEO of Borders this morning, I know pretty much what he would say, and he would say that they have not. In fact, they are redoubling their effort, and they're going to improve the customer experience by outsourcing that to Amazon.com. And sometimes, when something isn't your core business and e-commerce isn't their core business, it does make more sense to outsource it to somebody who really is focused on it like a laser.
Do you still have a desk made out of a door?
Yes, I do. I built the first 3 desks and auctioned one of them off, and on Amazon Auctions, my mom was the winning bidder. And she actually was a heated competition among several of the early investors in Amazon.com. So
For young people to actually do that self-assessment and find that passion. Do you have any advice?
I think many kids and many grown-ups do figure out over time what their passions are. And sometimes we let I don't think it's that hard. I think what happens though sometimes is that we let our intellectual selves overrule those passions. And so that's what needs to be guarded against. Kids are very good about knowing what their passions are. If you look at the big ideas at Amazon, what we're really focused on is thinking long term, putting the customer at the center of our universe, and inventing. Those are the 3 big ideas, and they work well together. Well, I think that if you're straightforward and clear about the way that you're going to operate, then you can operate in whatever way you choose. And we don't even take a position on whether our way is the right way. We just claim it's our way. But Warren Buffett has a great saying along these lines. He says, you can hold a ballet, and that can be successful. And you can hold a rock concert, and that can be successful. Just don't hold a ballet and advertise it as a rock concert. And so you need to be clear with all of your stakeholders with, are you holding a ballet or are you holding a rock concert? And then people get to self-select in. It's just that different people are motivated by different things. And
Is there a particular recipe that you have in terms of how you actually innovate in that collaborative culture?
I think I don't think there's a particular recipe, but there are elements of what we do that I think help. So one of them is that inside our culture, we understand that even though we have some big businesses, new businesses start out small. And so, it would be very easy for, say, the person who runs our U.S. books category to say, why are we doing these experiments? That generated, a tiny bit of revenue last year. Why don't we instead focus those resources and all that brain power on the books category, which is a big business for us? That would be a natural thing to have happen. But instead, inside Amazon, when a new business reaches some small milestone of sales, email messages go around and everybody's giving virtual high fives for reaching that milestone. We know from our past experiences that big things start small. If you want to do anything new, you've got to be willing to let that acorn grow into a little sapling and then finally into a small tree, and maybe one day it'll be a big business on its own.
Greta Team Ferocity. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means step by step ferociously, and it's the motto for Blue Origin. To put one foot in front of the other, things take time, and but you want to do those steps with passion and ferocity.
You recognized what was happening with the internet, and you said, you know what, there's actually a room for me to start with books and then move on. How do you do that? How do you find the time and the momentum, the zeitgeist?
Well, I think to some degree, you follow your passions, and then wait. You have to hope the wave catches you. I was always interested in computers. I was always interested in software. I was always a big reader, and so it wasn't, which made me alert to things like the internet and the possibility that you could build a bookstore online that would have universal selection. I think everybody has their own passion, their own thing that they're interested in, and then you're very alert to the things that are in the sphere of influence of that passion. Do I love every moment of every day? No, that's why they call it work. There are things that I don't enjoy, but if I'm really objective about it and I look at it, I'm so lucky to be working alongside all these passionate people, and I love it. Some things are still, require big teams, lots of resources, many years to pull together, and those are very important innovations too. But he's right that we're on a trend line where every passing year, more powerful things can be done by small teams.
As you have Amazon being successful, you have potentially a lumbering giant. How do you remain nimble? Because there is somebody in their dorm room who could eat you up for lunch the next day.
My belief on this is, first of all, that's completely correct, and you can never assure anybody that can't happen. But I think if you have a customer-centric culture, that cures a lot of ills. There is a real chance that technology may ultimately fulfill its promise of helping with education. I think people have hoped for that for a long time, and it hasn't really ever come to fruition, not in a big way. But I'm still very optimistic that may happen, and in fact, maybe some of the kids who visit Mohi will be the ones who will really figure it out.
Your favorite Seattle hangout to get a clear head?
My favorite Seattle hangout to get a clear head? My shower. Relaxing. You're alone.
You have one of those rainforest shower heads?
It's a very good place to do your best deep thinking. I think it's a coincidence that, that Liberty tends to do such a good job of, sort of creating an economy that functions well. I think it's always hard to know why you're drawn to a particular thing. I think part of it is if you have a facility with that thing, then of course it's satisfying to do it, and so in a way that's self-reinforcing. And certainly I always had a facility with computers. I always got along well with them, and they're such extraordinary tools. I mean, you can teach them to do things, and then they actually do them. I mean, it's a kind of an incredible tool that we've built here in the 20th century. I went to my boss and said to him, I'm going to go do this crazy thing, and I'm going to start this company selling books online. And this is something that I had already been talking to him about in a sort of more general context. But then he said, let's go on a walk. And we went on a 2-hour walk in Central Park in New York City. And the conclusion of that was this. He said, this actually sounds like a really good idea to me. But it sounds like it would be a better idea for somebody who didn't already have a good job. And he convinced me to think about it for 48 hours before making a final decision. And so I went away and was trying to find the right framework in which to make that kind of big decision. And I'd already talked to my wife about this, and she was very supportive and said, look, you can count me in 100%. Whatever you want to do. It's true. She had married this kind of, fairly stable guy and a stable career path, and now he wanted to go do this crazy thing, but she was 100% supportive. So it really was a decision that I had to make for myself. And the framework I found, which made the decision incredibly easy, was what I called, which only a nerd would call, a regret minimization framework. So I wanted to project myself forward to age 80 and say, okay, now I'm looking back on my life. I want to have minimized the number of regrets I have. And I knew that when I was 80, I was not going to regret having tried this. I was not going to regret having trying to participate in this thing called the internet that I thought was going to be a really big deal. I knew that if I failed, I wouldn't regret that. But I knew the one thing I might regret is not ever having tried. And I knew that that would haunt me every day. And so when I thought about it that way, it was an incredibly easy decision. If you can project yourself out to age 80 and sort of think, what will I think at that time? It gets you away from some of the daily pieces of confusion. I left this Wall Street firm in the middle of the year. When you do that, you walk away from your annual bonus. And that's the kind of thing that in the short term can confuse you. But if you think about the long term, then you can really make good life decisions that you won't regret later. I wrote about a 30-page business plan. I wrote a first draft. In fact, I wrote the first draft on the car trip from the East Coast to the West Coast, and that is very helpful. Now, the business plan won't survive its first encounters with reality. It will always be different. The reality will never be the plan, but the discipline of writing the plan forces you to think through some of the issues and to get sort of mentally comfortable in the space. I mean, then you start to understand, if you push on this knob, this will move over here, and so on. And what you do with those early investment dollars, so if you have $300,000 and then you have $1 million, what you do with those early precious capital resources is you go about systematically trying to eliminate risk. So you pick whatever you think the biggest problems are and you try to eliminate them one at a time. We still have a tremendous amount of hard work ahead of us, but we have all of the assets in place now. We have eliminated the necessity for the luck that a startup company requires. And now, our future is in our own hands as a team and as a company. We are at a point now where we have all of the things we need to build an important and lasting company. And if we don't, it will be shame on us. The stress primarily comes from not taking action over something that you can have some control over. So if I find that some particular thing is causing me to have stress, that's a warning flag for me. What it means is there's something that I haven't completely identified, perhaps in my conscious mind, that is bothering me, and I haven't yet taken any action on it. I find as soon as I identify it and make the first phone call or send off the first email message or whatever it is that we're going to do to start to address that situation, even if it's not solved, the mere fact that we're addressing it dramatically reduces any stress that might come from it. So stress comes from ignoring things that you shouldn't be ignoring, I think in large part. So stress doesn't come, people get stress wrong all the time in my opinion. Stress doesn't come from hard work, for example. You can be working incredibly hard and loving it. Do something you're very passionate about, and don't try to chase what is kind of the hot passion of the day. I think we actually saw this, I think you see it all over the place in many different contexts, but I think we saw it in the internet world quite a bit, where at the sort of peak of the sort of internet mania in say 1999, you found people who were very passionate about something. They kind of left that job and decided, I'm going to do something in the internet because it's it was almost like the 1849 gold rush. If you go back and study the history of the 1849 gold rush, you find that at that time everybody who was within shouting distance of California was they might have been a doctor, but they quit being a doctor and they started panning for gold. And that almost never works. And even if it does work, according to some metric, financial success or whatever it might be, I suspect it leaves you ultimately unsatisfied. So you really need to be very clear with yourself. And I think one of the best ways to do that is this notion of projecting yourself forward to age 80, looking back on your life and trying to make sure you've minimized the number of regrets you have. I don't want to be 80 and think, shoot, I missed that whole thing and I don't have the kind of relationship with my son that I wished I had, and so on and so on.